Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for 22 News at Noon. I'm Rich Tadimer. A former Westfield police officer has been charged with the murder of his wife. Brian Fion was
As far as the motive is concerned, Fion was having an affair with another woman at the time. The affair began early, it seems early in March, around that area is when things get intimate.
I believe that her faith was important to her because she lived by her faith. She was the salt of the earth, genuine and loving.
911 to sign recorded. What's the address of your emergency?
Hi, this is Brian Fion from North Road. My wife just shot herself. Can you send me some help?
All right, Brian, we'll get him right out there, okay?
She's gone. Oh, God.
Okay, are you sure?
Yes.
She smiled for a photo. 8 hours later, she was dead. My wife just shot herself. Can you send me some help? She's gone. God. Oh my. Are you sure? Yes. The husband was a detective. He said it was suicide. But when investigators arrived, they saw one thing that didn't match. The wound was wrong. The story was wrong. And his phone, that was the real problem. This is the story of Amy Fion, the woman who smiled for a last photo, the husband who planned her death, and the one text he sent while she was still warm. May 8, 2018, Westfield, Massachusetts. Just a normal Tuesday. Amy Fion woke up like she always did, made coffee, went about her morning. She had a baby shower coming up. Someone close to her was expecting. Amy was making something handmade for it. She loved doing things like that, giving without expecting anything back. That evening, she texted her daughter, Tori, just a typical mother-daughter chat. Nothing special. Nothing that hinted it would be the last one. Before the day ended, Amy smiled for a photo. Just a simple picture. Nothing dramatic. She had no idea it would be the last image anyone would ever take of her alive. Hours later, that same woman was dead on her dining room floor. Westfield police and fire responded immediately to the family home. When they arrived, they found 51-year-old Amy Fion on the dining room floor. A single gunshot wound to the right side of her head. Her husband, Brian Fion, a Westfield police detective of many years, was kneeling beside her. The dining room was scattered. A spent casing on the floor. Blood spatter on the window frame between the dining room and the breezeway. A pair of glasses nearby carrying what appeared to be reddish-brown residue. The weapon used was Brian Fion's own service pistol. Massachusetts State Police Detective Brendan Owl was called to the scene. He walked in, saw the body, saw the wound, and something stopped him. He later said, "I saw the entry wound to her head. It didn't seem right in that moment." Amy Jean Hansen was born on June 8, 1966 to Richard Hansen and Patricia Tarrant. She came from a large family. The Hansen girls in particular were remembered warmly in Westfield. She had 8 siblings, mostly girls, and a boy. They were known as some of the prettiest, smartest, and nicest girls in town. Amy was all 3. Everyone who knew Amy said the same thing. She always gave more than she kept for herself. At church, she volunteered behind the scenes. She wasn't interested in standing out or getting credit. She simply showed up, gave her time, and went home. Her faith wasn't for show. It was deep, real, and part of her daily life. Amy loved being outside. She hiked, kayaked, rode her bike, and tended her garden. Not as activities to brag about, but just because she genuinely enjoyed them. Being out in nature brought her peace, and people around her noticed that about her. The night before Amy died, she was making a gift. There was a baby shower coming up, someone close to her expecting a baby, and Amy was working on something handmade for it. Assistant District Attorney Mary Sandstom, assigned to the case, described Amy simply. She sounds like a fairy tale. Giving, selfless, completely dedicated to her family. Then she added, she wasn't ready to die. Amy was healthy. She was happy. That detail matters a lot, actually. Partly because of what happened next, and partly because Amy had no idea that the man she'd built her life around had quietly started planning a future without her. Amy met Brian Fion in 1983. She was 16. He was 19. They went to Westfield High School. At some point, in the usual way young people cross paths in a small town, something clicked. In 1985, they got married. Brian came from a family with deep roots in Westfield, a lineage of police officers and public servants. Joining the Westfield Police Department was not a detour for Brian Fion. It was an inheritance. He rose through the ranks. He became a detective. By the time Amy died, he had spent the better part of his adult life as a figure of genuine standing in Westfield. Reporter Stephanie Barry put it plainly. There was no one who spent any amount of time in Westfield who didn't know who Brian Fion was. They had 2 children together, a son, Travis, and a daughter, Tori. By all accounts, the family was rooted, stable, and respected. They were, by the measure of their community, the kind of couple other people looked to. 33 years of marriage, and a house on the edge of all of it that no one from the outside could see inside. On the afternoon of May 8, 2018, several hours after the 911 call, Massachusetts State Police Detective Brendan Owl brought Brian Fion to the State Police Barracks in Russell, Massachusetts. The interview began at 2:41 p.m. Brian sat across from the detective. He was calm. He was coherent. He was, after all, a man who had spent his career on the other side of these conversations. Owl asked him to walk through what had happened. Brian told investigators he departed his office at the Westfield station at approximately 11:45 a.m. and headed home. His wife was also making her way back to prepare lunch. What was she making? Butter and jelly sandwiches. He stated that shortly after arriving home, a dispute from the previous evening resurfaced and quickly escalated. What was the argument about? Retirement. Brian claimed he expressed to Amy that he had no desire to spend his retirement years upkeeping their 200-year-old property, a home Amy remained deeply attached to. The couple also touched on the subject of their aging dog, with Brian expressing hesitation about getting a new one. I don't want to be tied down by a dog. She always wants to have a dog. I want to travel more than she does. Brian maintained that the situation rapidly deteriorated from there. I took my gun out of the holster and put it on our hutch because I had to use the bathroom. He recounted closing the bathroom door. And upon returning, he found Amy holding the firearm with the barrel pressed to the right side of her head. I think she said, "I guess you don't want me around or you don't want to be around me." Brian stated he was standing roughly 4 to 5 feet away when he made an attempt to prevent Amy from firing the weapon. Tried to get to her. I almost did. She's so quick. At the end of the interview, Owl asked Brian to hand over his phone for data extraction. Brian complied, but he added something before the recorder went off. Owl later described the moment. I turned off the recorder and that's when Brian told me, he said, "You're going to see some things on there and it's not what it appears to be." For Detective Owl, that was a clear warning sign. Right after Amy died, investigators grabbed everything digital from Brian Fion, his personal phone, his laptop, even his work computer at the Westfield Police Department. They handed the tech to Detective Tom Forrest from the Massachusetts State Police Cybercrime Unit. He dug through the hard drives. The trail didn't start on May 8th. It went all the way back to early March 2018. Not just a weird search here or there, but a pattern. The kind of trail you only notice when you lay out all the details. And this wasn't grief. This was calculation. Late February, early March, Brian kept looking up the name Corrine Knowles. People called her Corey. By April 2nd, his searches took a turn. He wanted to know if you could have an affair without sex. He literally typed that in. A couple weeks later, April 17th, he dove into Massachusetts divorce law. Page after page. And he wasn't just curious. He zeroed in on one thing: what happens to your pension when you split up? Brian was close to retirement. That pension was a big deal. Investigators later learned he told Corrine he worried about losing part of it if he divorced Amy. But he didn't stop at divorce. On May 7th, just one day before Amy died, Brian kept Googling how to delete the frequently contacted list on his phone. Not a full wipe, just how to get rid of the people he called the most. On the morning of May 8th, while Brian was still sitting at his desk at the police department, he looked up Massachusetts medical examiner offices. He found a page about forensics units, the teams that show up when someone dies, the ones that comb through scenes and bodies to figure out what happened. He left work at exactly 11:47 a.m., not 11:45 like he claimed. By lunchtime, he was home. Prosecutors said there was a reason for that. He didn't want detectives to know how much he'd been talking to Corrine Knowles. Assistant District Attorney Mary Sandstom summed it up. It's only when this affair starts up that all of these incriminating searches start to appear. This wasn't a man losing control. This was a man planning, step by step, doing his homework. Brian Fion was a detective. He understood how murder investigations work because he had spent decades running them. He knew what forensic examiners look for at a scene. He knew what digital evidence can reveal. He knew, in short, exactly what he would be up against if things went wrong. And so the searches are not just incriminating. They are a kind of arrogance. He studied the tools that would be used against him and still believed he could outsmart them. That is a very specific kind of thinking. It is not the thinking of a man who loved his wife and was afraid of losing her. It is the thinking of a man who believed the system he had spent 30 years working inside could be managed and beaten. He was almost right. On May 14, 2018, Amy's wake was held at the Fion Adams Funeral Home on Broad Street in Westfield. 3 days later, on May 17th, Brian Fion came back for a second round of questioning. He arrived at the District Attorney's State Police Office. Detective Owl was there. Detective Mike Blanchett was there. This time, before the interview started, Owl read Brian his Miranda rights. "You know your Miranda rights. I'm going to read you this form." Brian noticed immediately. "The other day you didn't do this. Has something changed? So you're not under arrest or anything." "I know that." Notice what he asks. Notice that the very first thing Brian picks up on, sitting in a room where he has just been reminded of his rights, is the change in procedure. Not, "How is the investigation going?" Not, "Is there any news about Amy?" The first thing he processes is what it means for him. This session was different. Owl and Blanchett had the forensic results. They had the phone data. They had a photo of Corrine Knowles. And they had a specific question about the wound. There's no doubt she was shot. But the question is, from what distance? It was right freaking there. I'm telling you. Well, do what you need to. But I'm telling you, it was right there. The absence of gunshot residue on Amy's wound was significant. In a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head fired at close range, GSR and stippling, the burning particles from the muzzle blast are normally present on the skin. They were not present on Amy. The wound, as Detective Owl noted, was not consistent with someone shooting themselves. Brian stuck to his story. At the same time, across town that same afternoon, detectives sat down with Corrine Knowles. While Brian had described her to Owl as just a friend, the deleted texts recovered from his phone told a completely different story. Investigators had recovered thousands of deleted messages between the two of them. Thousands. The relationship was not a friendship. It had become something else entirely. At 12:47 p.m. on May 8, 2018, while Amy Fion was lying dead on the dining room floor, while first responders were still in the house, Brian Fion sent Corrine Knowles a text message. "Please don't call or text for a while. I'll call when I can. Really bad. Pray for my family, please." Amy Hansen Fion had been dead for minutes, and he was already managing the situation. His wife had just died, and he was already sending texts to make sure no one connected the dots. How do you even do that? Brian Fion was charged with murder on November 6, 2019, over 18 months after Amy died. The whole process moved slowly, but on purpose. The investigators took their time building the case piece by piece. No shortcuts. The next day, Fion stood in Hampton Superior Court. He pleaded not guilty. That courtroom was packed. Reporter Stephanie Berry was there, and she described the atmosphere as pure shock. It just lingered in the air. But the real surprise was what she saw right behind Fion. Amy's own family sitting in seats usually meant for the accused supporters. Her relatives, her in-laws, some of them truly believing Amy took her own life. They thought Brian was innocent. To them, this whole prosecution was a terrible mistake. Barry had never seen anything like it before. A victim's family openly supporting the accused. The trial didn't start until February 23, 2023, almost 5 years after Amy died. The prosecution's first witness was Amy's sister, Anna Hansen. Anna described a conversation with Brian a few weeks after Amy died. He told her he was worried about something he'd searched online. She asked what it was. He answered, How to make a murder look like a suicide. Those were his exact words. During cross-examination, the defense pointed out that Detective Forrest never found that exact search on Brian's computers. But still, the conversation was recorded and made part of the evidence. Those words came straight from Brian to Amy's sister. Prosecutors spent the next month making their case. 40 witnesses, 2 full weeks of testimony, digital evidence, forensics, an affair, a financial motive. They brought it all out. The defense, led by Jeffrey Brown, countered that Amy had a tough history, anxiety, emotional swings. She'd written certain things in her diary. And their own forensic expert, Alexander Jason, testified that her thick hair could have blocked gunshot residue from reaching her skin. Maybe the particles never landed. But in closing, Jeffrey Brown said she raised the gun up to her head in a fit of rage and in effect caused her own death. Prosecutor Mary Sandstorm laid it all out. The digital timeline, the affair searches in March, divorce and pension searches in April, gunshot residue videos on April 27th, medical examiner's office searches on May 8th, and Brian leaving the Westfield Police Department at 11:47 that morning. He's looking up and researching the teams who will turn up after he commits this murder. The evidence here proves beyond a reasonable doubt that he knew what he was going to do when he left the Westfield Police Department at 11:47 on May 8th. The jury got the case on March 21st, 2023. They needed less than 2 days. On March 22nd, 2023, the verdict came back. Guilty of first-degree murder. That same afternoon in Springfield, the judge sentenced Brian to life in prison with no chance for parole. Stephanie Berry said the mood in the courtroom was gutting. On Brian's side, people who'd believed in him completely just broke down. Hampton District Attorney Anthony Gugliuni released a statement. Mr. Fanion's behavior was calculating and shockingly cruel. I commend the jury for seeing through his defense and holding him accountable. This result shows that no matter who you are, justice is blind. After the verdict, Jeffrey Brown addressed the judge. Your Honor, the jury plainly got it wrong. Anyone that truly knew Amy Fanion, Brian Fanion knows that Brian Fanion did not shoot his wife. Brian Fanion used the knowledge he had built up over a career in law enforcement. Knowledge that was supposed to serve justice. He used it to try to commit the perfect crime. He researched the forensics that would be used against him. He studied the investigators who would come. And when they came anyway, he sat across from his own colleagues in an interview room and performed grief with the same careful planning he had given to everything else. The verdict is not hard to understand. What sits underneath it is the question that never quite gets answered in cases like this. Not whether he did it. The jury settled that in under 2 days. The question is, how many people who worked alongside Brian Fanion, who trusted him in the field, who called him a colleague and a friend, how long does it take to unlearn that version of someone? Some of them may never fully get there. That is not weakness. That is just what happens when someone corrupts a trust that deep. Amy's family have carried what no amount of legal resolution fully addresses. Her daughter Tori continues to live in Westfield, raising her own family. Her son Travis does too. They stood by their father through the trial and after it. They lost both parents in a single afternoon. Their mother to violence and their father to the truth about what he had done. There is something specific to Westfield in this story that does not fully come through in a national headline. Brian Fanion was not just a husband who killed his wife. He was a representative of the institution his community trusted most. The one that shows up when things go wrong. The one that stands between ordinary people and the worst moments of their lives. He used that trust against it twice. Once in the dining room and once in the interview room. What cases like this leave behind in small, close communities is not just grief. It is a quieter kind of awareness. A realization that the uniform, the title, the decades of service, none of it on its own guarantees anything. Westfield already knew that the way most communities know it in theory. After May 8, 2018, they knew it for real. That knowledge costs something. It always does. Amy Jean Hansen Fanion, a woman full of life. She was 51 years old when she lost her life to this heinous act of violence. And the person responsible is now behind bars, paying for his actions. When you walk away from the story, ask yourself one thing. How many people are smiling for their last photo right now? And how many of them have no idea? Amy's name deserves to be remembered. Not as a headline, not as a case. As the woman who gave more than she kept. The woman who never saw it coming. If the story stayed with you, share it. Share it so Amy's name reaches someone who needs to hear it. One share could be the thing that reminds someone they matter. It matters that Amy's name keeps being said and said correctly. If you'd like to support the channel and help us keep covering cases like this, liking and subscribing would be a perfect way to do that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.